Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Sioux River and its delta in southeast Alaska. This area is nearly sea level and consists of sand and gravel bars split by fingers of the Sioux River as it makes its way into the Gulf of Alaska. As it braids into different streams, it creates several avenues for fishermen to pitch lures and tempt hungry salmon making their way up the waterway. As the subjects of our episode found out, it isn't only fishermen who stalk the brush and swales. In the months before August 1986, Bob and Marietta Herron were organizing a salmon fishing trip along the Sioux River in Alaska. They pitched the idea to their friend Bill Myers, and he decided to tag along. By August, their plans for a salmon fishing trip into the Alaska wilds were transforming into reality. As the fishing trip approached, Bob had inquired of the outfitter, Brent, if they should bring firearms with them. Brent informed them that firearms are no good unless you know how to use them, so Bob and Marietta brought Bill along with them to the shooting range for practice. Bob and Marietta had purchased twin .357 Magnums manufactured by Colt, and Bill had opted for the .357 Magnum by Smith & Wesson. All three pistols were revolvers and very powerful in form and function. Brent, the outfitter, agreed to set up all the necessary equipment, transportation, and rigging for the fishing expedition. Dates were set and arrangements were made to bring the three Los Angelinos to the land of the midnight sun. When the departure date arrived, they knew they would have no concerns about their trip. The food, shelter, and fishing gear were up there waiting for them. After a series of flights and relaying flights, they eventually stepped from a small aircraft onto the sandbars along the Sioux River Delta and the promise of pure salmon fishing bliss it offered. Bob and Marietta glanced around the delta, took in the cool, clean air, and stared at the forested rise just above their camp. The Gulf of Alaska lapped upon the shore as the camp assistant Brenda erected the wall tents. The tents were a canvas fabric placed over a plywood floor and walls. There were 4 tents up, and Bob and Marietta and Bill chose theirs and deposited their belongings inside. Soon a young man, probably in his mid-20s, walked up and introduced himself. He announced to the group that he would be their guide for the fishing trip and introduced himself as Randy. By his side was his wife and the camp cook, Betty. Back in the big city, the three friends relied on professionals for everything. If your electrical system had some problems, you called an electrician. If there were potholes in the road, the city maintenance department would come out and fill it. At the fishing camp, they quickly learned that if there was something that needed to be done, they needed to do it. They gathered the wood for a campfire and rolled logs near it to sit on. Soon another couple emerged from one of the wall tents. They introduced themselves as Paul and Laco Whitestone. Paul was a mellow guy, and Laco was an energetic balance to her partner. He had brought along a single-action .44 Magnum and a .38 caliber pistol, just for reassurance. Not wanting to waste time, each person grabbed a pole and headed toward the winding series of fingers the river splits into just behind their camp. The fishing was exciting and productive. The group pulled in 6 big and beautiful silver salmon by late afternoon. Randy gathered the fish and cleaned them. He placed each of the fish into a single plastic bag and used rocks to submerge it in the creek, Bob's and his tent mate's wall tent. After some quality time around the campfire, with their bellies full, the fishing party all headed for their bunks and some sleep. They planned for an early and long day fishing, so rest would be important for them. At about 4 a.m., the entire camp was awakened by an increasingly shrill scream of "Bear! Bear! Bear!" from the camp cook, Betty. Everyone quickly stumbled from their tents, flashlights searching the darkness. Bob asked Betty what had happened, and she explained that she had heard a crash outside of her tent. When she shined her flashlight, she watched as a gigantic brown bear dashed into the bushes on the edge of the camp. The campers began to look around where the bear had been seen, and quickly noted that their cooler had been crushed. The barbecue grill was smashed, and the rubber dinghy had been ripped up. The 6 salmon that Randy had submerged behind Bob's tent were missing, bag and all. They were far too excited to consider going back to bed, so they waited until the sun came up around 5 a.m. and went back to fishing. As soon as the sun rose, a sense of safety and optimism filled the fishing party. They cast their lures in the river and reeled in several glimmering salmon, but the bear continually crossed their minds. Randy could see the concern on their brows and reassured them that they had nothing to worry about. Toward the middle of the afternoon, the outfitter Brent flew in with some additional supplies. The fishing party gathered around his plane in excitement and relayed their account of the brown bear visit. After listening to the damage it had done to the camp, Brent looked at the group and said, "You may have to do away with that bear." The campers all stared at him, half expecting him to provide further information or instruction. When they realized that was his complete statement, they understood he expected them to handle the bear themselves. The tone of Brent's discussion with the group gave them an uneasy feeling. They tried to fish, but eventually ended up milling around camp and waiting for dinner. Marietta was worried, and at the campfire suggested the campers organize a bear watch. Randy was off-put by this suggestion, and played down her fears. After realizing he couldn't talk her out of it, he tacitly agreed. Just as the twilight was setting in, at around 10:30 p.m., the bear was spotted about 200 yards from camp. The campers began to yell and picked up pots and pans to cling together. The bear was driven off by all the noise, but the campers were all uneasy at the fact that it had already returned to the area around their camp. After everyone went to bed, Marietta, Bill, and Randy stayed up and talked around the campfire, serving their shifts on the bear watch. Brenda also stayed up and gladly borrowed Paul's .44 mag to reassure herself. Randy had a .30-06 hunting rifle and leaned it up against a nearby log. He had a difficult time hiding his frustration with the amount of fear that gripped the campers. Even though he was youthful, he was accustomed to salmon fishing alongside bears and didn't believe the bear posed any serious threat yet. As the evening went on, rain began to drizzle, making the bleak mood even more so. Around 12:30 a.m., the bear was spotlighted by the moonlight, which brought the pots and pans and screams from the campers once again. This time, he seemed to leave more reluctantly than before. Within 2 hours he had returned, and this time was only 70 yards away from the camp. Pots and pans clanging together and frustrated screams for much longer than before finally drove him off for the rest of the night. At sunup, the members of the Bear Watch retired for some rest. The group was beleaguered by the stress and worry the standoffs with the bear had brought. Later on that morning, a charter plane landed on the sandbar, and a pair of fishermen stepped off. After approaching the new arrivals, the elder of the group asked Bob what it was that he was packing on his hip. Bob relayed that it was a .357 Magnum pistol, and passed on the details of the encounter with the bear. The elder fisherman informed him that shooting a brown bear with a .357 mag was like trying to knock a bowling pin over with a marble. He stated that the only thing you could do with that small of a gun is put yourself out of your misery after the bear attack. With this info, Bob understood the only firearm that was adequate to protect the group was Randy's .30-06 rifle. Marietta had lost all interest in fishing, and by dinner time had volunteered to stay up again to watch for the bear. This time Randy's wife Betty agreed to keep her company. At about 1 a.m. a dense fog rolled into the camp, limiting visibility to just a few feet and making a bear watch impossible. Betty and Marietta decided to go to bed since staying up to watch was not going to be productive. At 2:30 a.m. Lyko woke up and didn't see anyone on bear watch. By around 4 a.m. Lyko woke everyone up in camp by banging on the garbage can lid. The campers stumbled from their tents and observed the bear only 50 yards away in the brush, just east of the camp. Under the illumination of several flashlights, the bear tossed its head back and forth, sniffing the scent of each of the campers. Bob, Bill, and another one of the campers fired 7 warning shots into the air before the bear decided to leave. The rest of the night was filled with anxiety and restlessness, despite the bear not returning. The next day, fishing was lackluster, and the group was tortured with the thought of the bear's return to their camp. Some of them wanted to leave as soon as possible, but given they had no radio in camp, they could not arrange a flight back to safety. At one point, Bob asked Randy how they would know if they needed to shoot the bear. Randy flatly replied, "You will know," and stared back for a few seconds. That night, Bill and camp assistant Brenda took responsibility for the bear watch. The northern lights added to the moonlight to show the bear appearing about 150 yards from camp. It was loping parallel to the camp as Bill clambered to his feet. He lifted his pistol and fired once into the air. The bear seemed to pick up its pace and then veered off toward a ranger camp down the beach. At just after 1 a.m., Bill climbed into his bunk and announced he was going to sleep. He indicated that Brenda was still out there, so Bob decided to keep her company to help pass the time. By 2 a.m., Bob picked up the bear's silhouette out on a sandbar about 70 yards from the camp and to the west. It was walking toward the camp, so Bob hopped to his feet and yelled at the bear as he fired shots into the air. Previously, after hearing the shots, the bear would begin to move away, but this time it picked up its pace as it headed toward the camp. By the time the bear was only 15 yards away and across a small creek, the rest of the campers had emerged. They joined in a loud and terrified chorus of screams and yells, banging and shooting. Hiding themselves behind a log, they kept the fire between them and the bear as it swung its head from side to side, sampling their scents once again. The frustration of the past few days began to well up in Bob, and he told the group that there would be no more warning shots. The bear knew good and well that they were people and not prey, yet it grew in boldness and aggression toward them. The noise and warning shots had only brought it closer, and now only 15 yards separated it from them. The comments the charter plane fisherman made about how inadequate a .357 Magnum would be for self-defense from a brown bear haunted Bob's mind. He quickly barked out orders to Marietta to put her pistol into the bear's ear and pull the trigger if it attacked him. The armed campers now agreed to shoot to kill if the bear crossed the small creek toward their camp. The bear was standing on its hind feet and swinging its head back and forth when it suddenly dropped to all fours and splashed into the creek, separating it from the campers. Bob and Bill began shooting, but Bob was hoping to hear a much larger volley. He urgently wanted to hear the roar of Randy's .30-06, but only heard him mutter, "Oh, damn." Paul and Brenda didn't fire a single shot, but seemed frozen in terror. The charging bear suddenly stopped in the middle of the creek. Randy yelled out to everyone to stop shooting, announcing that it hadn't been wounded yet. He stated he'd seen the bullets that were fired splashing into the surrounding water. Just as the bear turned away ever so slightly, Bob finished squeezing off one last shot. The bear jumped after Bob's shot, and the muzzle flash allowed him to see the bear's legs jerk in reaction to something. The bear disappeared into the darkness, leaving the campers uncertain of its condition and location. With almost half of the night remaining, the campers gathered around the campfire and continually watched for the bear to reappear. Randy was checking out his .30-06 and had removed the bullet that wouldn't fire from its action. After examining the bullet, he pointed out that the firing pin hadn't dented the primer. The rifle was too dirty to operate reliably, and clearly hadn't been cleaned or fired in a long time. As the campers warily watched, they would see the bear a few times throughout the remaining hours. It would dash from one place to another a few hundred yards away, then disappear for a while. Then in another place it would dash across a sandbar, to disappear once again. After a few tense hours, the sunrise brought the twilight of morning. Bob and Randy searched the sandbars and gravel swales for the bear, when Randy pointed out a large mound of gravel that wasn't familiar to them, a few hundred yards away. The men agreed to go investigate and cautiously made their way toward the mound. Several yards away from it they could see a long line of bear scat, finishing at the bear's carcass. It had purged its bowels as it staggered, its final few steps before expiring. Randy rolled the bear over and quickly began to perform an informal necropsy on the bear's carcass. After examining the bear's hide, he found that only 2 bullets had struck the bear, and they were both .357 Magnum rounds. The first bullet had struck the bear in the thigh and lodged just above the leg joint. The second bullet struck the bear near the back of its ribs and traveled through one of the bear's lungs. It lodged just under the skin of the bear's chest. By mid-afternoon, the fishing party was now relieved and even giddy, knowing the bear would no longer threaten them. Brent had flown in again to deliver more supplies and was greeted with a full story detailing the bear's death. Following the exuberance, Brent relayed that on his way in he'd buzzed a giant brown bear about a mile away, headed in a straight line toward the fishing camp. Bob and Marietta opted to return with Brent, and on their way out they buzzed the bear at only 1/2 mile from the fishing camp. After reviewing the accounts of this episode, I have a few questions for you. Was the bear behaving in a territorial or predatory manner toward the fishing campers? Why did the campers fire so many warning shots? Do you think Randy knew his rifle was inoperable? Would you ever put your fish within 10 yards of your tent? I sure wouldn't. I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us back to the area around Big Delta, Alaska. Fairbanks is about 60 miles to the northwest, and the confluence of the Tanana and Delta rivers is nearby. To the north lie the White Mountains, with the Granite Mountains to the southeast. The Alaska Range provides the boundary to the southwest, and is by far the largest range of the 3. Along the Delta River, the topography flattens out, and oxbows in the river form, creating brushy fingers that fill with salmon and conceal moose, black bears, and brown bears. With high mountains in which to hibernate and flat brushy places to catch salmon, this area is prime habitat for bears of any type. Late summer of 1977, 30-year-old Cynthia Dussel-Bacon was in her third year completing geological field mapping for the Alaska Geology branch of the United States Geological Survey. This involved her spending time alone in very remote stretches of the Alaska wilderness. Spending up to a week at a time in the backcountry while unarmed, she was vulnerable and exposed to constant danger. Cynthia was a brilliant woman who appreciated science, learning, and the outdoors. Charlie, her husband of only 5 months, also worked as a geologist for the U.S. Geological Survey. It wasn't an everyday occurrence, but spotting a bear every once in a while was part of the experience. Cynthia had a limited amount of training on how to handle injuries and animal altercations. Each time she had run into a bear over the previous years, they had either been unaware of her presence or dashed off in terror. She had never to this point had a frightening or dangerous encounter with any bear. Off and on through the survey, the expedition had been supported with a helicopter to fly them into remote areas. When they weren't supported with a helicopter, they had to rely on performing their professional duties from their backpacks. This year, helicopter support funding had been approved, so they would be ferried in and out of locations that way. Cynthia's walkie-talkie was a vital tool in her safety and comfort. She was required to check in by radio every few hours with a pilot's wife, who acted as the coordinator for the project. This regular contact reassured Cynthia that help wasn't far away, in concept, and that if she didn't check in, someone would soon investigate. Her days would pass with radio check-ins with base every few hours, and the rest of the time passed with her pulling rock samples. After analyzing and notating the type of rock she found, and locating it on her map, she would hike to another spot and repeat the same process. At the end of each day, she would hike to the bottom of the ridge and meet Ed on a gravel bar along the creek to fly back to base camp for the night. Primary assumption during the 70s was that as long as anyone in the backcountry made noise when they traveled, avoided surprising and feeding bears, and didn't get between a bear's food or them and their cubs, they would tend to flee from human sight. Their primary nature was one of avoidance of humans, and not predating on them or defending their territory from them. At this point in history, carrying a firearm into the backcountry was believed to be more dangerous than a confrontation with a bear. The belief was that an injured bear would be more dangerous and aggressive than a curious bear that would leave unharmed. The problem with that line of thinking is that it assumed that bears were merely curious and would leave without harm. At 8 a.m. August 13, 1977, helicopter pilot Ed Spencer dropped Cynthia off on a rocky ridge with her assigned survey area having already been mapped out. Cynthia carried with her a light lunch, her walkie-talkie, her geologist's hammer, and a map of her location. Her lunch was some baked beans, canned fruit, along with some juice and crackers. This combination of energy-rich foods was designed to help power her through her day of rock hounding and hiking. One unanticipated aspect of this sweet lunch was that bears also enjoy sugar and can smell it from miles away. At the end of the workday, Cynthia began to make her way down the slope when she came across an old machine trail that had long since been abandoned, but allowed a sloped path down an otherwise steep ridge. It wasn't exactly easy going, as it traversed scree slides and was entangled by thick brush, but it was easier going than the alternative. Running into a bear was always in the back of Cynthia's mind when she was in the field. As she studied the trail, she could see the green and bushy growth along the Salcha River, and between it, dry and tangled low brush that didn't seem likely to house a bear or any other large animal. This part of the ridge also hosted several private cabins, which she expected bears to avoid. She carefully planned her descent from small rise to small rise, so that she could use them as vantage points as she approached her pickup location. As Cynthia arrived at each of her waypoints, she would stop and collect rock samples and chart them on her map. Before continuing, she would look over the territory below and ahead of her to make sure she wasn't going to run into any bears in her descent. As she pulled samples from the rocky knob, she noticed an interesting sample. She took her hammer out and broke it free from its mother rock for closer examination. As Cynthia held the sample close, a sudden crack disrupted her focus from only a few yards away. She quickly looked downslope and saw a black bear lift its head above the brush and turn in her direction from only 10 feet away. At first she felt relief at it being a black bear as opposed to a grizzly. Added to that, this black bear seemed smaller than many of the others, who had dashed into the brush at first sight of her previously. She was convinced that this bear would do the same after Cynthia showed it she was a human being. Guided by the prevailing wisdom at the time and her experience, Cynthia decided to strike fear into the bear by yelling and waving her arms at it. She yelled, "Go away! Get out of here!" at the bear while clapping her hands together. The black bear was not intimidated by her display of power and command. Its stone-faced glare relayed the bear's lack of fear of the woman and filled her with an increasing terror she had a hard time controlling. The black bear's head dropped below the bushes, and it slowly walked toward her up the small incline between them. As it continued closer, it stared directly into Cynthia's eyes, as if it were curious more than angry. It didn't growl or raise its hackles, so it was clearly not afraid of her. With the bear only a few feet away from her, Cynthia pounded her rock hammer on the stony outcropping at one more attempt to drive it off. She screamed more vociferously and waved her arms demonstrably as she took a few slow steps up the slope. The black bear suddenly broke off its advance toward Cynthia and ran a quick circle around her into the brush. She had completely lost sight of the bear, as it was now concealed by the tangled brush completely surrounding her. She scanned the hillside, hoping to see it disappearing into the distance. The next sensation Cynthia felt was being driven onto her face from an overwhelming force from behind her. She froze because she knew that the source of this impact had to be the bear, and she hoped it would think she was dead and leave. As she lay face down, she felt the searing pain and immense pressure of the bear biting onto her right shoulder. With each toss of its head, the bear's teeth penetrated deeper into her flesh. She was powerless to resist any movement of the bear, as it seemed to be many times stronger than her. Her head and arms flailed violently as the bear shook her with irresistible force. Then it paused and listened and watched Cynthia for any signs of life or defense. She now knew the bear was not attacking out of defensive motives, as it had clearly seen she was a human and had more than ample opportunity to flee. Her mind raced, and she knew she had to reach out for help. Her radio was the only means of contacting anyone who could intervene, and it was secured in her backpack. Reaching her left arm behind her, Cynthia groped around, trying to pull her walkie-talkie from its buckled pouch on her pack. Her movement set off a renewed round of biting and thrashing by the bear. It still gripped her right shoulder in its jaws and bit down even harder. The clicking of the bear's teeth against her bones horrified Cynthia, as the seriousness of this attack grew desperate. Powerless to resist the bear's aggression, she did her best to lay still as it bit her shoulder, arm, and right side of her body in rapid and painful attacks. She knew that her best hope was to convince the bear that she was dead, so it would leave. But each time the bear bit into her, it tossed its head and ripped her flesh, causing tremendous pain and damage. Redirecting its attack on her head, the bear bit into the flesh of her scalp and ripped and tore patches loose, chewing and swallowing them as it did. Each time the bear returned to pull more flesh from her head, she could hear the bear's teeth grate against her skull and feel the pressure of each of its teeth against her bones. Cynthia's mind flashed as she recalled that bears don't kill first. They simply start eating until their prey dies of blood loss, which could take a very long time. She considered fighting back just to speed up her own death and minimize her suffering, but held on to the hope that it would leave her alone somehow. The bear began to change its position and dug its canines into her arm. It pulled her down the slope several yards as she did her best to play dead and stay limp, despite being jabbed by sticks and poked by rocks. The effort soon tired the bear, and it paused to pant its hot breath into her ear. It was clearly watching her for any signs of life or resistance. The blood seeping from one of the holes ripped into her side drew the bear's attention. It began to lick her blood before it resumed dragging her through the brush down the hill. Pulling the combined weight of Cynthia and her pack through the brush for several more yards, the bear found a place to rest once again. Dragging 150 pounds through tangled brush and over rocks and duff was draining, even if it was downhill. After around 30 minutes of exertion, the bear decided to retreat a few feet from Cynthia and laid down to rest. While panting to regain its energy, it continually stared at her, making sure she didn't escape. The bear had retreated toward Cynthia's right side, leaving her undamaged left arm hidden from its eyes. She again groped around her backpack to try to access her walkie-talkie. Due to the bear dragging her or some other aspect of the attack, the buckle on the pocket containing the walkie-talkie was now open. She slowly felt around the inside of the pocket and withdrew the walkie-talkie stealthily. Somehow she carefully clicked the power button on and extended the radio antenna without drawing any reaction from the resting bear. Bringing the radio close to her mouth, she spoke into the microphone, uttering, "Ed, this is Cynthia. Come quick. I'm being eaten by a bear." She repeated her plea for help and relayed her location before the bear rose to its feet. In only a few bounds, the bear was back in a renewed attack, but this time on her left arm. Its teeth ripped new wounds, and its claws gashed her only remaining hope to hold on to her radio, her lifeline. Cynthia understood that she hadn't been able to fully extend the antenna before sending her urgent message. She also recognized that she was in a ravine, which would limit how far her signal would travel. She'd done all she could do, and now hoped that someone's voice would crackle across the radio. She longed for confirmation that her message was received and help was on the way. Realizing that playing dead had not deterred the bear, Cynthia cried out and yelled while it attacked her left arm. She remained face down as she heard the bear sniffing her body and felt its hot breath on her thighs and calves. Fear welled up that it would bite into her legs and open up wounds there, which would bleed much more than those in her arms and shoulder. For some reason, Cynthia's backpack drew the bear's attention. It tore at the pack and began crunching on the cans she'd brought for her lunch. Her mind raced to find anything she could do to aid in her rescue. The pressure of the bear's mass pressed her flat on the ground as it munched her lunch for the next 10 minutes. In the distance, the familiar sound of a helicopter approached her location and lifted her spirits. Had they heard her cries for help over the walkie-talkie? Would they arrive in time to save her life? Sounds of the helicopter grew louder as it approached, then circled her location. Then it disappeared, draining her hope of immediate rescue. Her heart sank as she considered it may have simply been moving one of the other geologists to a new location or refueling at the nearby gas depot. The sound of the helicopter had no effect on the bear, and it finished eating Cynthia's lunch. The blood seeping from the wound ripped into the side of her back drew the bear's attention once again. It bit and chewed at her flesh, consuming chunks of her body as she refused to react to the pain. The helicopter suddenly began to circle her location once again, and soon hovered directly over her. Cynthia kicked her legs to show the pilot she was there, since her arms were numb and wouldn't move. Then the helicopter flew up and over the ridge just above her, and out of sight. The hopeless feeling of abandonment set in once again, this time with abiding cruelty. Even though the helicopter was not there, Cynthia could sense that the bear had left as well. Undoubtedly, the noise and presence of the helicopter had run the bear off, at least temporarily. Cynthia lay still and quiet for another 10 minutes before she could hear the helicopter returning from over the ridge. This time it landed a few hundred yards above her. Its engines shut down, and voices followed. Cynthia wasn't going to let this opportunity for rescue slip away. She began yelling in response to the voices, but understood that the brush around her concealed her location. Soon Ed approached her and called out to the other 2 women who had accompanied him. The 3 of them carried Cynthia back up the ridge and eventually managed to place her in the back seat of the helicopter. As they flew her toward Fort Greely and Delta Junction, Ed radioed ahead to make sure the medical staff there were prepared to help Cynthia. During the flight, Cynthia had time to evaluate her own injuries. She knew the bear hadn't managed to damage her internal organs, but also acknowledged that her arms had been severely mangled during the attack. She knew she would live, but the quality of her life was called into question in her mind. After landing at the Army base, medics there set up a blood transfusion and worked hard to stabilize Cynthia's condition. Treating her pain with morphine, they prepared to transport her to Fairbanks for emergency surgery. At the Army base hospital, her wounds were cleaned and any dead tissue was removed. Cynthia's left arm was amputated between her elbow and her shoulder, since most of her forearm tissues had been consumed by the bear. In a 5-hour effort to save her right arm, surgeons grafted a blood vessel from her left leg down the length of her right arm.
This operation ensured a steady blood supply that would save her right arm. After an overnight stay in Fairbanks, Cynthia was flown to San Francisco and placed in intensive care at Stanford Hospital. Within a week of her arrival, a blood clot had formed in her right arm, causing it to grow cold, and a pulse could no longer be detected there. Cynthia developed a high fever, and doctors feared that an infection had set in. Rushed into the operating room, surgeons soon realized that the tissues in Cynthia's arm had begun to rot all the way up to the top of her shoulder. They immediately amputated it to prevent it from spreading infection through the rest of her body. Though the amputation was a success, medical staff had discovered that the wound in Cynthia's side was prone to repeated infection. As the bear consumed her flesh there, it had eaten a lymph node assigned to fighting off infection in that area. Surgeries utilized skin grafts pulled from other areas of Cynthia's body to cover up the exposed muscle and bone in her side. For 6 more weeks, Cynthia endured painful skin grafts as IVs of fluids and antibodies pushed back the infection. Though the bear had chewed through the brachial arteries in each of her arms, Cynthia somehow survived the attack. Her youth and excellent condition undoubtedly aided in her survival and recovery. Following her attack, Cynthia found out that her SOS had been heard by Ed's wife at the command center. While searching for her, he had had a hard time piloting and looking for her simultaneously, so he left to get assistance. The second time he arrived, he could find no safe place to land near her, and had to leave to locate a more desirable landing spot. In the analysis of Cynthia's attack, squaring the circle of determining the cause of her attack is important. If she startled the bear as it slept, why didn't it run away? When it had a good opportunity to flee, it circled around her and ambushed her from behind. Did the bear see Cynthia's sudden presence as a threat? If this were the case, then it seems it would have fled soon after the threat she posed was disabled. Was Cynthia's attack strictly predatory? Given there were no cubs present at her attack and no animal carcass was found cached nearby, did the bear see her as an opportunity to eat? This seems to be the apparent motivation to her attack, as the bear did slowly stalk toward her after having ample opportunity to flee. It cleverly set up an ambush even after it knew it had been seen. It chewed away portions of her body and ate it. The bear also dragged her down the hill, trying to get her into the trees to cache her body. These are each predatory behaviors and answer any question in my mind as to its motives. There is one more detail that casts a shade of doubt on this conclusion. Ed had requested that the Alaska Fish and Game find and destroy that bear and test it for rabies, given its behavior was so out of the norm. Their efforts in this search did locate a single bear, which they shot and killed. Upon examining the bear, they discovered it was a sow, and soon thereafter they located a 1-year-old cub and left it to fend for itself. During the necropsy on the sow, the examiners found a small amount of blueberries in her stomach and mystery fluid, which they concluded may have been Cynthia's tissues dissolved by digestion. There was nothing conclusively linking the sow to Cynthia, though. Cynthia eventually healed as much as she could from such a devastating attack. She was fitted with a prosthetic arm on what remained of her left arm, but there was nothing to attach one to on her right shoulder. She trained herself to utilize her feet as additional hands, and returned to her duties as a wife and geologist eventually. Cynthia exhibited extreme determination in both her survival and her adaptation to life after losing her arms. Her story is one of the most inspiring stories I've ever heard, and is discussed in many books and articles. She went on to author reference manuals with her husband regarding geological distributions in Alaska and other regions. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Was Cynthia's attack a defensive or predatory attack? Do you think the Fish and Game hunters killed the bear that attacked Cynthia? Is it possible the sow did attack Cynthia after being unable to locate her 1-year-old cub? Would bear spray or a firearm have prevented Cynthia's attack? I will gladly read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Kalahonda Creek, near Disenchantment Bay in southeast Alaska. This area is the southern coastal region of the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains, which host a collection of tidewater glaciers and creates an elevated boundary. This high wall of mountains is a barrier to passing clouds that fill with moisture on the Alaska Current. This current is an ocean current that is warmer than the landmass it passes over, which increases precipitation generally. Due to a higher amount of precipitation and colder temperatures above the landmass, accumulations of snow form glaciers in the valleys. With this net gain of snow each year, the Hubbard Glacier flows down its valley and calves icebergs into Disenchantment Bay. This behavior is what makes it a tidewater glacier, as it does not melt into a stream flowing to a water system, but deposits its ice directly into the sea. These icebergs give way with tremendous cracks, while shelves of ice fall from the glacier's face into the sea, sometimes several hundred feet below. The icebergs that drift into the bay, and eventually to the Gulf of Alaska, act as pupping and molting grounds for harbor seals, providing a floating island very near their food source. The tidewater glacier zones are important sources for fresh water and nutrient cycles in the ocean, and only exist in latitudes above 45 degrees. In Antarctica and Patagonia in the south, and Alaska, Greenland, and Svalbard, Norway. Kalahonda Creek climbs the mountain opposite the park boundary on the south side of Disenchantment Bay. It is a very short and straight creek of only about 5 miles in length. The mountains on either side of the creek rise to around 3,500 feet in elevation over a short distance, making them extremely steep in places. Giant Sitka spruce tower over the landscape as the iconic Alaskan tree, and wildflowers, such as wild orchids, blossom in their shadows. Bushes like willow and alder create a majestic color palette each fall as they shed their leaves. On May 13, 2016, a 29-year-old man, whom we'll call Charlie, was camping with some friends and family members along Kalahonda Creek. This time of year, the snow is beginning to melt, making the creek rush with clean, cold water. Charlie volunteered to take the bucket down to the creek to fill it with water for cooking breakfast and clean up afterward. Now, Charlie and his family and friends were not greenhorns who were unfamiliar with the wilds of Alaska. I would describe them as adventurers who would gladly risk life and limb to enjoy the peace and beauty of the road less traveled. Given their experience and knowledge of the risks, Charlie packed a firearm, even on his short trip to the creek bank. He also knew that if he made noise while he slowly hiked, any bears in the area would likely hear him and have time to move out, preventing a confrontation. There was no source indicating that Charlie nor anyone in his party had brought bear spray along for this trip. Charlie picked and pushed his way through the dense vegetation toward the creek while talking loudly and glancing around every few yards. He knew that the key to avoiding a bear attack would be to prevent surprising the bear and hopefully detect it while it was still a safe distance away from him. As he worked his way around a tall, thick cluster of brush, Charlie came face to face with an enormous brown bear who wasn't at all happy to see him. The bear was only a few feet from the man, and both were forced to enter the fight-or-flight scenario brought on by a rush of adrenaline. Charlie's best option was to avoid the fight reaction and utilize the flight reaction. He turned and took about a half a step before the bear sent him splaying onto his face. The cold, moist ground offered Charlie no warm welcome, but he knew that wasn't going to be the worst of his problems. He curled his legs beneath him and put his hands around the back of his neck to protect the most vulnerable areas of his anatomy. With the man curled up in this position, the bear's perception of danger likely changed, but its excited response wasn't assuaged. Any portion of Charlie's body that protruded from his position enough to be bitten or swatted was chewed and clawed. Charlie could feel the bear's breath on his skin as it seemed to have a force of its own. As it chewed, the bear huffed and grunted, conveying to Charlie its anger at being surprised at such close range. Each time it bit Charlie, the pressure and pain seared through his body, but each swat from its claws ripped gashes that hurt just the same. After around 2.5 minutes, the bear felt as if it had neutralized any threat Charlie posed, and it disappeared into the nearby brush. Charlie knew better than to pop right up and try to escape. He fought the overwhelming desire to get up and leave, knowing that his safest option was to lay still while searching for the bear's location. If the bear was nearby watching for any signs of life, it could return and inflict even more damage to his body. Charlie peered around, slowly lifting his head to broaden his field of vision. He knew that if he caught even the slightest motion in his peripheral vision, then he would have to freeze and hope the bear hadn't seen him move. After a few long minutes of looking around, he felt confident the bear had left and was no longer waiting for him to move. As he lifted his head, he could feel blood trickling from numerous wounds all over his body. The pain was mitigated by adrenaline for now, but would soon set in. His family and friends were only about 100 yards away, but the noise of the rushing creek would mute any cries for help from him, at least in part. He opted to try to hike back toward his camp while yelling periodically for assistance. After limping his way through the brush and calling out, Charlie heard the welcomed response from one of the camp members. One by one, his family and friends rushed to his side to help him get back to camp. Upon arriving at camp, fellow campers began examining Charlie's injuries. They could see blood pouring from several gashes torn open by the bear's claws and numerous puncture wounds all over his body. The bear seemed to go into a frenzy during the attack, leaving welted bruises around each puncture made by the bear's teeth. Judging by his blood-soaked clothing, they knew they would need to get him to medical attention very soon, or he may perish. Charlie was loaded aboard the boat that brought the campers to their campground. They used the radio on the boat to alert the U.S. Coast Guard and the Yakutat Police Department as they piloted their boat westward through Disenchantment Bay. Several miles down the bay, a Coast Guard vessel came into view. They pulled their boat alongside the craft that held Charlie. On board, they had brought a doctor from the clinic in town, along with various medical supplies he anticipated he would need to patch up Charlie's wounds until they could get him to a hospital. The doctor joined Charlie in his family's boat as the Coast Guard vessel accompanied them back to the harbor. An emergency medical response team was waiting for their arrival at the harbor. Charlie was loaded aboard an ambulance and rushed to the clinic in Yakutat, where he was stabilized. His wounds were cleaned and bandaged, but his journey was not yet complete. A medical helicopter was arranged and equipped to support Charlie as they flew him to the Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage. The doctors there examined Charlie's wounds and noted that he had portions of his scalp torn off his skull by the bear's claws as it swiped at his head. His right shoulder had numerous nickel-sized punctures from the bear's teeth and serrations from its claws. His left shoulder hadn't fared much better and suffered similar damage. His lower body was severely injured with enormous bite wounds along the outside portions of his thighs and calf muscles. His wounds were exactly what you would expect for someone to receive, as they were curled into the fetal position, protecting himself as best he could. Numerous surgeries were required to close his wounds and fight off the possibility of infection. Charlie's recovery took several months to heal his body, but the wounds in his mind will linger for the rest of his life. He and his family are grateful that his injuries weren't worse and that he lived to tell the tale. As for the bear, its attack on Charlie was chalked up to being a defensive encounter and lined up with expected behavior of a bear involved in a surprise confrontation. It hadn't tried to bury Charlie as a food cache, nor had it returned to the area or defended him against rescuers. No source indicated the presence of cubs, and no action was taken against there pertaining to Charlie's attack. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions. Given Charlie had a firearm and was making noise as he traveled, do you think bear spray may have prevented this attack? Do you think the noise Charlie was making was drowned out by the rushing creek, or did the bear use Charlie's sounds to hone in on him? Is the beauty and peace of a remote area like Disenchantment Bay worth the risk of being attacked by an enormous brown bear? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.